You just came back from a trip to Ethiopia.
Yeah.
And it has everything to do with the work that you've been doing with the Oromo and the Gada system. How was the reception in Ethiopia for you? And is the Gada system in place in Ethiopia, in the Oromia region at least? And how much of it is the population aware of? The importance of the system and in their ability to create a democratic system within their government.
Right. Well, I think Gada is alive and well in Oromia, mainly because they have the values, even if they don't have the institution. They have the values underlying the institution. For instance, the idea of transfer of power peacefully from generation to generation is something that existed in Oromia for 3.5 centuries. So there's nothing new about that. The fact that the last transfer of power was done peacefully, to me, is an indication of the fact that those values have continued right up until the present time and have come into play at a time when an Oromo was elected to power. And what is he saying? He's saying, I'm here on borrowed time. Tomorrow you'll be able to elect somebody else and I'll renounce my position. There are very few people in Africa who will tell you that they are there on borrowed time. No, they are there for keeps, at least for their term of office, if not for a much longer time. So the Oromo have the values, they never had the institutions, because the institutions were crushed quite methodically by royalist traditions in Amhara. They were crushed partly unintentionally. In the case of Wolaga, it was unintentional. The leaders of Wolaga began fighting a war that lasted for 20 years with all the rulers of Ethiopia, with Gojam first and then with Shoa. During that process, the people who used to be called Abadula, which is war chief, who's elected just for one war and then really goes back to civilian life. The Abadulas found themselves fighting and then accumulating firearms and fighting with big societies that are a great many firearms than they do. So they became institutionalized as Moti. The word Moti exists in our Oromo language. It means king, but it's not. It's not. It's a marginal element of their society. Now it has become institutionalized. The people began calling themselves Moti instead of Abadullah. So the values are there. So when an environment comes into being that encourages them to begin exercising their values, they do so. They do so abundantly. It's shown very, very clearly that they have those values. Now, what remains, though, is to begin to think about their institutions in relation to the traditional institutions that they've had for centuries. That is yet to be done. The idea of celebrating Gada is completely part of Ethiopia. There's no ceremony that is performed now unless the Abagadas are all lined up with their kalachas on their forehead and their traditional garbs. So they're a recognized part of the Ethiopian establishment right now. They never were that previously. That's a product of their recognition of Gada as a valid system of government that came about as a result of UNESCO recognized their institutions on a worldwide basis. So that's in place. But when it comes to Ethiopia as a whole, how can Ethiopia as a whole benefit from knowledge of traditional institutions of one of the biggest society in their culture? That is a big question mark in my mind, and probably in the minds of the leaders as well. They have it there to admire. Whether they will have it there to build on is another matter. It will take a revolution in thought for them to begin thinking about building their institutions on traditional values and traditional institutions, rather than viewing themselves as inventors of a new brand of democracy that's going to be purely Ethiopian, that will take elements from here, there, and everywhere, but in the final analysis, it will be something that they themselves have created. That is how Abiy thinks of what is in store for him in the immediate future.
Well, we're on the subject of
Yeah.
reconciliation of sorts, reconciliation between traditional systems of governance, for lack of a better word, reconciliation in itself. Like right now in the media, we've been hearing a lot about the certain elements of the Tigray population coming out and saying Eritreans and Eritreans and Tigrayans, we're closer in relationship, we speak the same language, we eat the same food, we're closer, we're brothers, we're sisters, and all that. For as someone who has documented the atrocities committed by Wayane in the last 20 years, and specifically in the 1998-2000, beginning with the deportation and all that, how do you respond to that kind of rhetoric in cyberspace?
Yeah, there have been crimes committed against their own people in two cases, in South Africa and in Rwanda, the genocide in Rwanda. In both cases, the way they managed to reconcile the peoples is by getting them to confront each other, to admit, to do penance, to admit the sins that they've committed, and lay it down for everybody to see before reconciliation can be made. So acknowledgement is a necessary condition for true reconciliation. On the other hand, denial of the things that happened and engaging in this festive activity of celebrating the new friendship between Eritrea and Ethiopia and claiming that we are one and the same people, well, none of that existed at the time that they were invading Eritrea. When they were invading Eritrea, it was total war. It was to completely destroy Eritrea and plant a Tigrayan government in Eritrea. That was the purpose, overtly expressed by the leaders of Wayane. So, and they committed horrendous crimes during that war.
Explain this criminality that evolved.
It's really peculiar. They committed crimes that were unheard of in the history of Ethiopia. The gang raping of Muslim women in the presence of their women and children was done on a massive scale in Basora, which I documented in detail and presented to international communities in Europe. And the desecration of churches and mosques, which was done also, and graves of Tagadilti. All of these are horrendous crimes that were committed. And for them to say, to now celebrate the friendship and similarity in our cultures and language and culture is shallow. It is meaningless to the people who suffered those crimes at all, unless they acknowledge and seek the forgiveness of the people toward whom they committed these crimes. Then it is totally meaningless to the people who suffered those crimes, and equally meaningless to the rest of Eritrea, because we are aware of these crimes and they can happen again. And so we have to insist on a process of reconciliation that is truthful and that does not sweep under the rug all the crimes that were committed during the course of the war. That is a necessary condition for true reconciliation.
We have this new peace between Eritrea and Ethiopia, and of course the Tigray situation exists also. What is Tigray's relationship with the rest of Ethiopia, and how does it compromise? How does it help? How does it hinder the unity of Ethiopians and the ability to move forward as one people? And what do you foresee in the future of Ethiopia? And how will that affect us as Eritreans, in the next 10, 15 years as we move forward?
Well, Tigray is in a very peculiar situation in Ethiopia right now, because it is occupying territories that were taken away from two neighboring peoples, Wollo and Gondar. And there's no indication that they are willing to give up those territories. Quite the contrary, they say. They are bilingual. The people of Welkite are bilingual. 82% of them speak Tigrinya, and therefore they are member of our society. A whole lot of people of Gondar are bilingual. If you were to use that criterion to say that who is Tigrayan and who is not, then you'll end up with half of Gondar who are bilingual becoming part of Tigray. This is nonsense. They are also, by the way, as in the case of Welkite, how many of them speak Amharic? 100%. So what is the 82% when you put it side by side with the fact that they are 100% Amharic speakers? So Tigray has a lot of fence mending, a lot of seeking for forgiveness that it has to engage in, because before it can truly be reconciled with the rest of Ethiopia. Nobody else has captured territory from neighbors on the scale that Tigray has done. That silly calendar that they created in the middle of the Wayane War, they still have it on their maps every day. We see it every day. That doesn't invite trust. That doesn't lead people toward conciliation, genuine conciliation, because conciliation implies forgiveness and seeking of forgiveness, admission of the crimes that were committed, in order for it to be meaningful and enduring. So I think Tigray is in a peculiar position, and it is not going to be all that is not going to be eliminated from the map or from history by the celebratory activity that they're engaging in now. So let's celebrate by all means, but let's also think more deeply about the necessary conditions for genuine conciliation.
I have, when the Eritrea-Ethiopia Boundary Commission delivered its decision in 2002, one of the Tigrayan leaders came out and said the rule of law has prevailed over the law of the jungle. And you hear a Tigrayan talking about the rule of law. Can you tell us a little bit about what laws do Tigrayan people have, and why is it hard for them to accept international law as we know it today, and this border commission's decision, and a little bit more about the society and its like we have codified traditional laws in Eritrea. Is there such, the Oromos have it in the Gada system, you told us about the Amharas who have it. What does Tigray have to fall on as far as legal traditions go?
Well, there is no indication at all that Tigrayans have anything comparable to our customary laws, which are written and documented and kept going, written by communities and administered by communities, kept going for centuries. There's no indication that that is the case. The fundamental principle that they operate on is that vendettas are totally prohibited in our customary laws, totally prohibited. Vendettas are very common in Tigray. I have gotten case after case of vendettas that go on for generations in Tigray. Somebody kills somebody else, they get gar, and the gar that they collected is used to generate, mobilize people to commit a vendetta against the people who killed your kind. So I'm not entirely sure that Tigray is an entirely lawful nation or has been a lawful nation in history. Quite the contrary, the degree of shiftiness in Tigray is extreme. It's excessive. It's widespread. It penetrated Eritrea throughout the time that Ras Alula was governing Eritrea. The Shiftas followed Alula's army and simply went ahead and raided people's homes, armed, fully armed. That went on right through the years that Alula was in Eritrea. But more than that, Tigrayan Shifta have actually occupied the boundary territory between Kenya and Ethiopia. The entire boundary, which remained undelimited for 60 years, was a no man's land, controlled entirely by Tigrayan Shifta, who traded in ivory and slaves and became very wealthy, fully armed. Both governments of Kenya and Ethiopia tried to wage a joint campaign to eliminate them and failed. And so in the end, that continued until the liberation of Kenya, at which point, well, before the liberation of Kenya, the British colonial administration went ahead and disarmed the entire population on their side of the boundary. And when they did that, they retreated. They started operating on the Ethiopian side, and of course there aren't enough elephants to feed their greed for ivory on the Ethiopian side, so they gradually began to fade. But for a major period of history, more than 60 years, they were in control of the Ethiopia-Kenya and no man's land boundary separating the two countries. So a nation, a people, Tigray, that has proved to be fully capable of behaving in this fashion on a massive scale, has serious questions about its ability to live under a body of commonly accepted laws. It's questionable. So it yet remains to be seen whether or not they will in fact abide by the laws of Ethiopia and return the territories that they have yanked away from neighboring territories. That should be the first step they should perform in order to become part of the new Ethiopia. But beyond that, it's a matter of accepting the rule of law in the country and participating on the same scale that their population permits. They are a minority. The only thing that they can be in Ethiopia is a minority in a democratic system, not the rulers. So, in a sense, the Wayane regime is now gone, so they have to learn to live with the reduced station that they have within the framework of the Ethiopian nation. Throughout the war years, Boy Subhat and others have repeated that again and again, and saying that we are contemptuous of Tigrayans, we look down on them, and so on. Well, there's a part of Tigray, namely the people of Agame, who used to go to Eritrea regularly to do menial jobs in Eritrea, and the Italian government put a limit on how many of them can come to Eritrea seasonally to do that. And so the only people that they saw were poor people coming to seek menial jobs in Eritrea. So from that, you get this notion that we view them all as poor people who are come to do menial jobs in our territory. But they generalize beyond that to say that we are contemptuous of them, an attitude that I feel is a misplaced attitude, because it is not Eritreans who are looking down on them. There's no reason why Eritreans should be contemptuous of Tigrayans at all. None. But they have an inferiority complex, which is very difficult to get rid of, until such time as there is some degree of communal understanding between the two peoples, and starting afresh on a new platform that eliminates all the tahdid with which the passion with which they started the campaign against Eritrea was entirely based on the notion that they have a right to Eritrea. They, Tigrayans, have a right to govern Eritrea. Well, that is now gone, and the reconciliation between the two peoples has to be done on a much deeper level than has been the case so far. between us and Tigray, as well as between Tigray and the rest of Ethiopia, because there in other parts of Ethiopia too, they have done all kinds of criminal activities that ought to be acknowledged and ought to be a part of the conciliation process.
I know you've written about the Gada system, and that's well and good, and it's getting rave reviews in Ethiopia. What about Eritrea? When is your next book on Eritrea going to come out? What is it going to be about? What are the areas that it'll cover? And how soon do you think that book will come out?
Well, it won't take me the kind of years that it took me to write my Oromo books, because a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be including in the book is stuff that was written up and submitted as reports to international organizations and to the government of Eritrea between 1984 and 2012. Throughout that period, I have conducted research almost every year after liberation. Almost every year we're doing a separate study, field-based research studies, surveys, investigations of issues like culture and health was the first study that we did in the first year after liberation, and then study of eradication of poverty. Then the displacement of people during the Wayane War, the expulsion of Eritreans and the human rights violations that were committed during that period. Then the rehabilitation of all the displaced people in Eritrea and the rebuilding of their lives. I participated both at the time that they were displaced and at the time that they were rehabilitated. I was with them. So in a sense, I spent about 10 years or so going back and forth to the displaced communities in southern Eritrea. So all of that will be assembled in the form of a book, which will be linked together by a narrative of my own life history and the history of Eritrea, to indicate to people what the situation was like at the time that we did each one of these studies, and hopefully this will be a portrait of Eritrea during the post-war years, but going back also to the last decade in the liberated zone, an experience which for me was a life-altering experience, going to the field, and I literally went back and retooled, reorganized my teaching career so that it focuses on issues and topics and subjects and methods that will be hopefully of use to Eritrea. So I reconceptualized my career in order to make it fit the future of Eritrea. So the last part of my teaching career was literally beamed at Eritrea. And then the post-war years, I spent engaged in research, humanitarian, human rights, development-oriented, customary laws, and so on. All of that will be incorporated into the book. It shouldn't take me more than about a couple of years to finish it.
Great. I know when we met in Asmara, there were a couple of young men who were helping you gathering your manuscripts and getting it published and all that. How many young people have you mentored, or how many are you taking under your wing to give them the skills and the know-how and at least the direction to carry on this anthropological work that is very nascent in Eritrea, from what I understand?
Well, there have been quite a few instances. For instance, when we were doing the customary law studies, the entire graduating class from law school participated in that exercise, and one of them ended up writing a beautiful book. Mulu Burhan, who became a judge subsequently, and wrote a comparative study of the laws of Eritrea as it applies to the rights of women. So quite a brilliant analytical study. So there have been individuals who have followed up my research on the Oromo side, and a number of people who have taken up the baton and proceeded with in-depth research in particular areas of Ethiopia where they came from and about which they had first-hand knowledge. So from Welaga there have been some individuals who've done that. In Borana, there are people who had followed up my research. In places like Guji, I've neglected that area completely, but their own people have done quite a lot of writing in English. Half a dozen books published by them on the Gada institution. So indirectly I have had an impact on their thinking because I encouraged them to do the same thing that I did in Borana.
كابتي حدا نزي ناي سلام كونيتات يخون نزي زلو كونيتات نخحلالو خود يوم أمولهم كوينوهم ديو هزبي تزاراري بي زفتحوت الشجر كم ذا عينت بيهيبر نهالهم ندافلت ناسي هو هزب خزارة روالو نداولو خلال خبولو فتن لهم لعبة قرب تبنى
نحن تاريخ رسعنا نحري أبكم زعينة زمدناتات كنات تخويننا we would be committing a great offense to ourselves بحكي ባህልና ስርዓትና ቋንቋናን ዋላ ዳይሌክት ተመሳሳሊ እዮም ዝብሉና ዘለዎ ስለዝኾነ ኣሕዋትና እዮም ዝብሉ ዘለዎ ኣብ ውሽጡ ግና እቲ feeling of ማሰይቲ peculiar ናይ ትግራይ ስምዒት እዩ መሰረት ኣለዎ እቲ ናይ ማሕራ ስርዓት has treated them like second class citizens throughout history. Yohannes Ba'alom ab Sultan Deibo, the language of the court was Amharic. It's amazing. Inferiority complex. Tigrinyas na ቤተ መንግስቱ ቋንቋ አይከውን ይለሞ በማህርኛም ዘሮ ነው ቤተ መንግስቲ ንጉሰ ነገስና ኢትዮጵያ ተብሂሎም ይምዝለኩን ዘለው so inferiority complex አለው በሐቂ and inferiority complex is a very difficult mental attitude because it's insatiable. You cannot easily redirect it toward peaceful collaborative relationship. Now, we are perfectly willing to forget all this and start afresh. بحكي ساتون كهم خطبهم كلها عاشيم زبلوا أنا عاشيم زاد عاشوا حجون كم تي قدم زقبروا حجون جيجا خقبريهم زبل إمنا تارلهم. So أنا نتيز مسؤول ده كورح كخال الله in order to survive friendship and neighborhood with Tigray. Because what is friendship and neighborhood now can be converted into something else anytime. You keep your friends at arm's length and watch them at the same time. Because that's Tariq because they're completely untrustworthy. They will take advantage of you if the opportunities offers itself, you know. ወራር ከካይዱ ከለው ያኔ ታንዲዶም የማትየው ታንዲዶም ተታዲድ ሲ it was peculiar it was done with a passion that I don't understand ካበዝ መጽዝ passion ናቶም ጎስጓስ ምስተናይ ካንተ ካለ ኢትዮጵያ ጎስጓስ ከተራይ ከለኻ ዶባ ናይ ዶብ ክትሕተይ ነው ንኤርትራ በምልታ ድምስስ አቢልካ ስርዓት ናይ ትግራይ ኣብ አመትካሊ ናይ ትግራይ ኣብ ኤርትራ መትካሊ ነር ዓላማው ጥልቅ ኢልካ ክትሪኦ ከለኻ ግና እቲ ቀደም ዝግበር ዝነበረ ቀደም ከሳዓጂ ወረባ ዝግበር ዝነበረ ግፍዕታት ኩሉ አክኖሌጅ ገይሮም ብኡ መሰረት مرددا أف مونغو خلتي حزب تግራይን ኤርትራን كግበር ተኽኢሉ ጽቡቕ ከምቲ ኣብ ሳውት ኣፍሪካን ኣብ ሩዋንዳን ተገብረ ከምኡ ክግበር ኣለዎ ኤርትራ ከምኡ ከይገበርካ if you just sweep the crimes under the rug the crimes that they committed are incredibly ነይሩ ተሰሚዑ ዘይፈልጥ ግፍዕታት የተፈጸሙ በወያኔ ኣብ ኤርትራ ተገብረ ሕጂ ዝኹሉ ሲ are we going to just sweep all that under the rug and say oh you I mean this is crazy. You can't do that. You have to confront people to the crimes that they committed and they have to acknowledge them and admit them and ask for forgiveness for them بحق تعرف ان هذا اب امباسوير از ገበሮ ገበን አጽያፊ ዝኾነ ገበን ነተናስላም ደቀ አንስትዮ ሰብ ሓዳር ተጋሲሶመን ሰራዊት ኢትዮጵያ ተጋሲሶመን daily for months daily ساعات حمشته ናይ ድሕሪ ቀትሪ ዕጥቂ ፈቲሕኩም ኢኹም ትኸዱ ዕጥቂ ብረት ከይትውሃቡ ተባሂሎም ግን ሳንጃ ተደሊኹም ሒዝኩም መፈራርሒ ክኾነኩም ሒዝኩም ትኸዱ ተጋሰሱን ኢሎም every day መጽኦም ኣብ ቅድሚ ደቀኒ ኣብ ቅድሚ ሰብኡተኒ ሸውዓተ ሰብ on average ሸውዓተ ሰብ ጋሰሱን
and it's documented
أنا دوكيومنت قبله خنديس عرب بفيديو قد يحيان تنانستي مسكرنا تيبان أمودة أتاقنا تنعبيتن بري تقاسسون كزارة ويدلان كما يحفري نوري تغيرو زلو so I said okay ماما مينا تبهال عباينيرا أمونقون أنا جاها قد لك زارة بخيلي إلى تني so I took her to Sweden with me حزايا خيدة قدمي UNICEF she gave evidence of what they had done you know was incredible thing كوف قيح مسقل فيديو تيب قديحه نايتي انست زنغراني التي قصنا شفناينا نغبرنينا فيديو نقرحو لنا هيبيوم I just told them I'm not going to translate it find somebody to translate it just listen to it اليوم قيح مسقل سمعوا and they were horrified because I wasn't speaking on their behalf they were speaking for themselves حجي قيح مسقل بزخونه مقدي اب جنيفا خيده مس حلفتنا قيح مسقل تزراريبه try to send somebody ناخذكم زوكل سب اب امباسادور سودي ليه because ساتكم دحر ليكم ايغبرونيم زنغر زي سبنا راي يغبرونيم كم عينت نورم صراحه and so they managed they actually met with Isaias and with Meles Zenawi at different times and basically they were told tom Ethiopian بانا بيلكم تاطوي لهم كما حزنا يرلنا تبطاي لهم tom Eritrean كامريتنا يزي بانا بيلكم تاطوي لهم بتن اتيوم ساتم اتيوم مساتو بتازاتو لا سمون the gang raping of women stopped تعذبت سلازلو طراي تزي اليوم they would have continued like this for indefinite حجي خمسة عينت قبن زفتصم هزبسي حجي تقلبيتو أحواتينا نحنا كبلنا خلو we are not fools you know we know the history and we know it's fully possible for them to repeat it so this أركي خبها الكلو مس إثيوبيا بمولو خان أرقنا خيلنا مس وياني قنا زغبروا غبنات كي تقبلوا خي امنولو ارقي خنغبرينا مبال اشنتي really is كارتانا تግራይ ተዳልዩሎም ዘውጽዋ ካርታ ላይ ኮነተን ታብዙ አባይ ትግራይ ንሳንታዮም ገይሮም ካብ ጎንደር ጭርማ ቢሎም ካብ ወሎ ጭርማ ቢሎም ካብ ኤርትራ ጭርማ ቢሎም አባይ ትግራይ ፈጥሮም ክሳሕጂ ላ ካርታ ክሳሕጂ ናይ ትግራይ ካርታ خريو خلاو ልክ ንሳያ ክሳሕጂ ዘሪዮ they don't alter it in any shape or form كلها ولا بعد ما يعجز بوتا حزه تحنصيص تكاتا اكولتن تنكل تخالوت غنا الوها ملاش ناي ولو زوسدو ول اكل ناي ولو رايا اكل ناي ولو نيرو اورومو انا حرام وليم ባህሎም ምን مس تግራይ ዘመድ የብሉን ሕጂ as long as መንዚዖም ዝወሰዱ መሬት ሞ ካብ ኣምሓራን ክልቲኡ ካብ ኣምሓራ እዩ ከመይ ወሎ ኣምሓራ ኮይኖም እዮም ካብ ወሎ ዝወሰዱ ኣለዉ ካብ ጎንደር ዝወሰዱ ኣለዉ እዚ ቦትኡ ከሎሲ ኣብ መንጎኦም ሓራን ሰላም መፅኢ ዝበሃል ዘበት እዩ እዚኣ በጣፊኢቶም ክትከውን እያ ኣይገድፎም እዮም ካብ ኩሉ ከዓ ዝሃብተመ መሬት ሑመራ ኣካል ናይ ጎንደር እዩ ነይሩ ሕጂ መሬቶም ገይሮም ኣለዉ ሕጂ እዚ حوحر مو حج سلام كن قبرينا موت منزعنا مريتنا وصرنا مريت كنا ركبنا خبلو اليوم ويانا no that's not what they're saying no أكلنا ينزلوا حالينا أنت ينزلوا بزعوا والقايت زاروا خلوس أنت يقولوا والقايت سي 80 كلتن مئتاويت والقايت هذا خمهور كواتاتو يخون نزل 80 كلتن مئتاويت كابول قايت تقرينيا ينزاروا بل أنا خان أقول ملتي زبون تايو 100 مئتاويت كام حرينيا زاروا تاسمانين كلتنسي بايلينغوال يوم سوازياتهم غوندر بزح غوندر بايلينغوال تقرينيا زاروا سمين غوندر بومل تقرينيا زاروا تخليها خد بخلتي يوم زاروا بايلينغوال يوم سوازياتهم بو مخنياتي ناتنا يوم كتبلهم زي كون نغري حجزس تግራይ تعباي تግራይ سي خمتاز نبرتا بجك بعد ما خيدا حج مملسي ولان بجك بعد ما تخال كله خمتا قعاسي صوم وسي ما نورو كم ايدو كم يجي كسلام كتقبر تخال مسيو نو واي تسوي انا مس اثيوبيا بحج زلو خنتات كنري خلنا زعرقوا لما قد زلو يمسلنا أبكو بزح كال بوتاتات ولا لهم عينة صجمات أب محرر له أب كالوت بهرات ولا له بزي حقهم قد تتحزم مريتات له حجي نخلو بحنس أكفت حيز والزلو كوميشن الداليو نخلو خفت حيز والزلو نقولوا ناي غوندرنا أكل بشامة تورست لبالويتو زبالة زرر والله محرر ولا شح عمت حلفه رستي تملشو نابوانا تاتيزم اللس ولا أمر الله زي أولبهم تسفروا محجزهم نيرون تقرأ
كبرات سمعتنا لالمس بروفيسور أسمرم لجسة أبزع ودينا لنا نهجي أب كالك زي بكال أرستيس قبل الرحب يك أني لي بروح معتي